evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of College Football Tuesday. As always, I'm your host, Larry Frank, along with Zach Mckinnell of the Blue Bloods. See, I almost did it. The Blue Bloods. I'm happy to have him in, and boy, do we have another great show for you tonight. We got so much football to talk about, Zach, last week and this week that we don't even have time to put a guest on the last 2 weeks, which just means that things are getting more and more exciting in college football as the year goes on.
Yeah, this year is, probably the most wild year that we've had since like '07 when we had a two-win national champion LSU team. Every week a top 10 team goes down. Every week a top 5 team's exposed. The madness continues. And this is probably the most uncertain Heisman and national title race that we've had in a long time.
And, you speak about the Heisman, and I know we ended our show, but, we'll get into the game later. But you got to admit that Kelly Pickett's making a very strong, surge for the Heisman Trophy with, I guess you would have to, and you got to say Matt Corral. What a great year he's having with Ole Miss. You just starting to see now these things, that's the great thing about college football. Beginning of the year, we talked about all these guys. We were talking about North Carolina, Howell possibly being. We were talking about the kid from Oklahoma possibly being. And things tend to work themselves out through the year. And a lot of those people that we thought would actually pan out to be Heisman candidates are no longer Heisman candidates. And you see guys like Corral and Pickett coming up and some of these other guys. Some people will argue even Keith Walker, you could possibly throw up there. Just some great things we're seeing this year in college football.
Yeah, I mentioned on my show probably 2 weeks ago that Kenny Pickett should probably be the Heisman favorite if we're strictly just talking on the field performance of this year. He has been electric, only one interception. He's one of the leaders in touchdown passes, leaders in yards per game, yards, passer efficiency. He's been like the sole reason Pitt finds themselves in the top 20 as a dark, is obviously a favorite for the ACC, a real dark horse for the playoffs. Pitt has taken such a large step forward this year, and Pickett's play has been elite. Then you look at Corral and Lane Kiffin's offense. He's been spectacular, one of the guys that we expected this year to really step up. And then on top of that, Bijan Robinson, Kenneth Walker, both having outstanding years. And that's not even getting to Bryce Young, who's the Alabama quarterback, who's also had a great year. And then Desmond Ridder, who's leading Cincinnati possibly into, a top 2 seed in the playoffs. So you have a lot of guys who really established themselves this year and made really good cases that they should be the 2021 Heisman winner.
And you just mentioned Ridder from Cincinnati. Now they move into the number 2 slot this week. Cincinnati, like we said last week, they really control their own destiny the rest of the way here.
Mm-hmm. As long as they keep winning. They kind of suffered a scare this past week against Navy, but as we know, the service academies are tricky teams. Army put up 56 on Wake Forest this weekend, but allowed 70. It was in a wild game. But for me, Cincinnati, you just got to win out, man. And the AAC is arguably wide open for them. And so if they could just get to that 12-0, 13-0 mark, they're going to be right in the thick of that playoff race.
Now, earlier this week, and I'm sure you heard it, I'm sure you probably talked about it on your show, the AAC had talked about adding some teams. Of course, they're going to be losing some teams, so they're adding some teams. Does this make the AAC better, or does it make them worse?
I think anytime you lose a UCF or a Cincinnati, who's a number 2 team in the country right now, probably getting a little bit worse. They added some really solid, teams. Like you look at like a UAB who's been, dominating the CUSA. But for me, anytime you lose a team that's ranked number 2 in the country right now, it's a huge loss. You look at what UCF has brought to the AAC over the past few years. I expected them to try to arguably rob the Sun Belt, but they ended up going a different direction. I still think arguably as a conference, they got a tad bit worse because Cincinnati and UCF are arguably top 3 teams in that conference. And then you have Houston, who has been ranked year in and year out since like 2015,
Yep.
and also brings a lot to some other sports, including basketball. Houston's always in the tournament. So for me, the AAC took a step back losing those 3 teams.
Yeah, and they'll take a step back, but that gives other teams now a chance to move forward. And that's the great thing about whether it's in basketball, like you said, but you got some really schools that, have been successful where they've been. They deserve that opportunity to get into a better conference than they already had. And now you got people going into the AAC that maybe wouldn't have had a chance before to we talk about strength of schedule. Well, this is what helps strength of schedule when think about the SEC, and you're playing all these teams like these Georgia teams, Florida, that who they play every year. It's just, you don't have to worry about strength of schedule when it comes to those schools.
No, I mean, and the AAC will be okay. I mean, we thought the same thing with the Sun Belt at one point. The CUSA now is arguably going to have to try to pull some FCS teams, but you're looking at a James Madison, someone like that, potentially having a chance to move up. And even at the FCS level, the South Lane Conference got robbed by the ASUN and the WAC. So they're talking about pulling some of the top D2 teams. You look at a Texas A&M Commerce, a West Florida, Delta State, teams like that potentially getting their shot at at the FCS level. So conference realignment is a never-ending topic in college football nowadays. And I think over these next 2-3 years, you're going to see a huge shift in the realignment of college football.
And before we get into the games from last week, I have to say tonight, representing the University of South Florida, who had a big win, a conference game versus Temple. I mean, big win for the USF being able to defeat Temple this week. So we want to go ahead and congratulate the University of South Florida with that win. But before we get to the Illinois-Penn State game, which is arguably probably the wildest game, close to the wildest game of the week, I want to get to the game that was played before that. Appalachian State beating Coastal Carolina, and that was a team they ranked 14th, Coastal Carolina. But when you look at this, Appalachian State 575 total yards, 228 on the ground. And the amazing stat about this game is that Appalachian State defense held Coastal Carolina to only 55 yards rushing in that game. Basically no running game for Coastal Carolina, and Appalachian State also had 3 sacks in that game, and the Wake Forest used a combination of 3 backs that ran the ball pretty effectively for 228 yards, 2 touchdowns by Cameron People, and Appalachian State, which how many times have we seen this team do this, comes in and beats a ranked team.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Cameron Peoples is a running back that was coming off an injury. He's the guy who rushed for like 6 touchdowns in the bowl game just a few years back. He was really their lead back, and Nerlin and Noel at the other running back spot. That's a big one, a 2-headed monster at Appalachian State. But the guy to talk about for me is Chase Bryce at quarterback.
Yes.
This is a guy who's been a journeyman. He started at Clemson, went to Duke, really struggled, and now he found his way to Appalachian State to replace one of the best quarterbacks in school history in Zach Thomas. So for me, for him to have this type of performance in prime time against the top 15 team, throwing for 2 touchdowns, 350 through the air, and then Malik Williams at the wide receiver spot having the game he did. And on top of that, Chase Bryce doing it against, from a deficit. They were down 14-0 after the first quarter, and then they dominated the second, third quarter stretch. I think, you look at that beautiful, awesome environment in Boone, North Carolina. It is one of the most underrated environments in college football. The fans showed up, the team responded, and so you got to give Appalachian State their props. And for Coastal Carolina, you got to kind of go back to the drawing board, because before Appalachian State, I'm pretty certain Coastal Carolina didn't beat a team with a winning record. They had 6 wins against some of the worst
Right.
teams in college football, and they finally got tested and they weren't able to respond. But you got to give Appalachian State credit as much as possible. But this is the first ranked team they've beaten since Michigan. I don't
And
know if you knew that.
you look at this, and you mentioned Chase Bryce. 347 yards, 350 yards, like you said, 2 touchdowns. But the amazing thing here, and listen to this, Zach. It took 2 receivers basically to get those stats. You mentioned
Yep.
Malik Williams, 10 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown. Let's not forget Corey Sutton had 113 yards receiving too, and a touchdown. But he had 18 completions, Chase Bryce, and out of the 18, 16 was to those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, it was arguably the best game through the air that I think I've seen Appalachian State have all year. And that defense, you got to give them props. You look at Demetrius Taylor at the edge spot. You look at some of those linebackers that are probably going to be Sunbelt All-Americans. They responded. Sean Jolly at corner was huge. And so for me, Appalachian State made a huge statement. And right now, them and Louisiana Lafayette are really taking control of the Sun Belt at this point. And for Appalachian State to do this after getting their doors blown off last week against Louisiana Lafayette was a huge, huge culture test, a huge, gut check for them. And they responded with flying colors.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the game easily people are talking about is the 9 overtime game between Illinois and Penn State. And I'm not surprised that Illinois won this game. I didn't necessarily pick them to win, but I said I'm not surprised. And let me explain a couple of things here. Illinois, 357 yards rushing. The funny thing, that's all they did. They ran all day long on this Penn State defense. Zach, they only had 38 yards through the air the whole day. I mean, Chase Brown, 223 yards, 1 touchdown. Illinois, listen to this, 9 of 18 on third down. Penn State, 4 of 17. Both quarterbacks were sacked 4 times. This is just a team, and as you know, if Penn State doesn't win playing defense, they don't win. And what happened? 357 yards on the ground, obviously kept the team going, obviously was very strong on third down conversions, but it was a close, tight game, and the better offensive team won this game at the end. And we got this new rule with the after so many overtimes you go, which really is no different to me. You still got to get some points, but the 2-point conversion and give Illinois credit. We've seen Illinois beat a couple of teams this year, good teams. They're one of those teams that you can't really look at their record and say they're good or bad. They're a very competitive team.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I mean, when you look at what caught up with Penn State, though, it's the lack of a run game. They've struggled to run the ball all season long, and Noah Kane and those guys just have not responded. John Lovett from Baylor transferred in; he hasn't brought much to the table. And when you're one dimensional in a conference game, it just isn't going to work. And when you have Illinois rushing for over 300 yards, they controlled the clock. They were able to achieve, convert on third down attempts, move the football, and the defense for Penn State just wore down. And then at overtime, let's give props to Brandon Peters. Arthur Satowski goes down with a broken arm. He's out for the year. Brandon Peters comes in and throws 2 big touchdowns to win the game in the 7th and 8th, or the 8th and 9th overtime. So let's give him his props. He came in big time for the Fighting Illini. And for Penn State, man, to come off a bye week and look this rusty, look this unfocused, execute this poorly, says a lot about the culture of that team. So right now, you got to be looking at James Franklin like, what happened? And then today in his press conference, he mixed Ohio State and Michigan up in his press conference. So he doesn't even look focused at this point. So for me, Penn State really, really choked this one away. And I love the new overtime rule. I think having to be creative with 2-point conversions shows a lot more talent than just executing a 25-yard drive. So to have it one and done, you got to call the perfect play call and you have to execute is the best way to do it. The only reason it lasted this long is because both offenses just went to sleep for like half. I mean, if you remember, they're wanting to score from like the third to like the eighth overtime. I mean, they couldn't put the ball in the end zone for anything. I just think the fatigue got to them, but I love the new overtime rules. But for Penn State, this was a game, but you're going to look back at the end of the year and be like, damn, we've really let that one slip away.
Yeah, not only did they leave it slip away, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, now they got to go play Ohio State. And believe me, you cannot play Ohio State like you played Illinois and expect to prevail. But we'll get into that a little bit later. One of the wildest games I thought, and I said wildest, is this Wake Forest now, what, 7-0? I think Wake Forest is. Sam Hartman, man. I don't know what to say. 458 yards, 5 touchdowns. Now listen to this game. 658 yards, 38 yards for Forest. Army, 595 yards. Army, 416 yards rushing, 179 passing. And when you look at these guys, Army had, it almost looks like Army, if you statistically, could have won this game if you just look at that. They had 3 guys who rushed for close to 100 yards on that team, Tyler Robinson and Atkins. But at the end of the day, give Sam Hartman credit, and Jacquez Robinson was 8 catches, 3 touchdowns, 157 yards, and also A.T. Perry had a great game. So, this is a game that, where the other one might have been more of a defensive battle or lack of offense in the Penn State game. This one didn't lack really any offense, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it really came down to which defense finally decided they wanted to play, I guess. I mean, it really came down to Wake Forest just making 2 or 3 big stops. And also, Army's just so one-dimensional. Even though it's efficient and they can run for, 300-400 yards a game if they want to, you're going to have to put the ball in the air at some point, especially against a Power 5 team like Wake Forest that has such a good offense. But if you're Wake Forest, you're looking like, man, if we're going to win the AAC, if we're going to win the ACC, we've got to stop somebody. Allowing 56 points to Army is not the way to do it, but you got to give Sam Hartman and, Clausen some credit for finding a way to win this game, and Clausen for having this team, a top 15 team right now in the hunt for the ACC championship. And man, this Wake Forest team has responded, and it's whatever you want to say, they keep finding ways to win, and that's the number one thing in college football is just to get a W week in and week out.
And we talked about that early in the season when Notre Dame, they weren't winning pretty, but they were winning. And this is exactly what Wake Forest is doing. They're putting the W on the board, and at the end of the year, it doesn't say, well, during this game they won, but they didn't win pretty. Nobody cares. You won. A win is a win is a win, as you and I say. Now, I'm going to tell you something else, my friend. I told you I'm not a De'Ara King fan, but I'll tell you what, I think Miami found a quarterback. This Tyler Van Dyke looked pretty darn good versus NC State over the weekend. 325 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was sacked 4 times. So he did have pressure in this game, but NC State 3 of 14 on third down. And you talk about being well balanced. You were just talking about Army being one-dimensional. How does this sound with Van Dyke in the game? Miami, 33 passes, 36 rushes in this game. That's more like the well-balanced you're talking about. Van Dyke, 2 touchdowns to Rambo. So a great game, but the surprising thing, yes, they have Devin Leary, NC State. Their running game wasn't that impressive, and we know how they rely on that. But at the end of the day, very, very, pleasantly surprised at Tyler Van Dyke.
Listen, that game was amazing for him. And listen, as much as Manny Diaz finds himself on the hot seat week after week, for this program to sit at 2-4, winless in the ACC, and respond like that at home when no one expected you to win with a backup quarterback, and you had every excuse to roll over, and the fact that they responded like that to win, It was an impressive performance by Van Dyke. Jalen Knighton finally coming alive for the Miami rushing attack. Charleston Rambo, Oklahoma transfer, finally showing why Miami was so excited for him to get there this all season. Say what you want about Manny Diaz, but the Hurricanes didn't quit, and this is a huge, huge win for them. As really and truly, they could find themselves in the top half of the ACC if they get a little hot and go on a win streak, as bad as the ACC has been this year.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how big of a loss was this for NC State?
It's probably it's as crazy as it sounds. It honestly could shake up their entire championship race. I mean, you look at how good Pitt's playing. You look at Wake Forest, both undefeated in the ACC. You needed this one. This is like because you needed as much leeway late in the season as you can get. You already got the big Clemson win, and now you have to play perfectly from now week 9 to the end of the season. And so NC State, this was a horrible loss because this was really a chance to establish yourself as a top 5 team. Now you have to win every single game from here on out to realistically find yourself in Charlotte for that ACC championship game.
Yep. Well, let's go to a game that didn't surprise you and didn't surprise me. We talked about this happening last week. Pittsburgh defeating Clemson. Your buddy Kenny Pickett, 300 yards passing again. I'm going to tell you, when I looked at this game, this Clemson offense looked terrible. I mean, DJ, they had to bring somebody else in. But when I look at Pittsburgh, and, one of the things you and I have been talking about this week so far on tonight's show is about being well-balanced. You cannot get any more well-balanced than Pittsburgh was in this game. They ran a total of 79 plays in this game. Listen to this. 40 rushes, 39 passes. It doesn't get any more even than that. 162 rushing yards, 302 passing yards. They were 10 of 18 on third down. But, this is a Clemson team that seems like if they give up, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but if they give up more than 10 points in any game, they're going to lose. I mean, they don't have an offense that is strong or can light a spark. And DJ, as you know, we've talked about this entire season. They were so high on him at the beginning of the year. I wouldn't even rank him in the top half of quarterbacks in the college football right now.
No, I mean, it has been it's been hard to watch almost. I mean, this offense is atrocious for Clemson. They can't run the ball. They can't pass block. They can't run block. They can't get any separation. I mean, they can't do a single thing like at an elite level like they usually can. And this is what I said on our show. The number one thing I've noticed missing from Clemson is their ability to create explosive plays. They're going to have to grind everything out, which means you're going to have to execute 10 to 12 times down the field and establish drives. When you had Travis Etienne, when you had Amari Rodgers, Trevor Lawrence, you were able to score 1, 2, 3 plays and just explode on somebody and therefore help your defense out. But they can't establish drives. They're atrocious on third downs. And that defense that is really talented under Brent Venables is just getting worn down. Those kids can't be out there 30, 40 minutes, doing what they're doing. So Clemson has to be better right now than they are. But you got to give Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison that run game, Pat Narduzzi at head coach. Pitt is playing really, really good football right now. They're winning week in and week out. And if it wasn't for that upset loss against Western Michigan a few weeks back, You'd be looking at a team that potentially could be scraping to get into the top 10, but they're slowly but surely gaining respect. And I think that Heisman hype is only going to help Pitt moving forward. And you got to give Kenny Pickett his respect after another big 300-yard performance.
Yeah, just an incredible performance. And, going from one extreme to another, a terrible performance this week by the Boilermakers. I mean, this is a team that, pretty much threw this game away. I mean, what was that? 6 interceptions in this game. There was sacked 6 times. Purdue was sacked 6 times. Aiden O'Connell was running for his life. He was relieved by Jack Plummer. And Wisconsin, you look at the statistics again, you would never think a team can win being 1 for 11 on third down, but that's all Wisconsin was. Mertz only had 8 passing attempts in this game, and they still won 30-13. Where they won was the defensive side of the ball. That defense just humiliated Purdue, cost them to throw 6 interceptions. Like I said, sacked them a number of times in this game, 6 times in the game. Just a terrible, terrible game all around for Purdue, who had just gotten in to the top 25.
Yeah, and I mean, you could tell. I mean, last week, I don't think anyone, Aiden O'Connell played great, but I don't think any of us were saying Purdue was a contender. And when you look at it, Wisconsin still has more talent than Purdue. And when you look at as great as Aiden O'Connell played last week, throw 3 interceptions, but it really had to do with the lack of a run game for Purdue. They had negative rushing yards, man. Negative 13 rushing yards.
Yep.
That's not going to cut it. And then you're giving up almost 300 on the ground to Wisconsin, and you have 5 turnovers. It's unsustainable. And you could tell that Purdue last weekend was like their national championship, and they came out flat, unprepared. And Wisconsin Wisconsin will take any win where they can run the ball 1,000 times and throw the ball 8 times. They will take that type of game where their defense can grind it out, and they're just gonna pound it down your throat running the football. This was a perfect Wisconsin game, and that's the type of game Purdue could not find themselves in, and they had no answer for the Badgers.
And like you said, Purdue negative 13 yards, and Wisconsin 290 yards on the ground. That's, obviously a big, big difference. Well, we're about to get ready for next week's games. Let us go ahead, take a quick station break, allow our stations to identify themselves. And when we come back, we're going to talk about this upcoming weekend's games, what games to watch out for, and who to watch out for. We'll be back right after this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to College Football Tuesday. I'm Larry Frank, along with Zach Mckinnell of the Blue Bloods. And for those of you that are online here, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a message to go ahead. If you want to ask either myself or Zach a question regarding college football, if you got a specific team you want to know about, that's what we're here for. Leave a message under the comment section, and we'll try to get to it as soon as possible and answer the question to the best of our ability. Now, I'm not going to wait at all on this game, my friend. This is a game coming up that, could right now be the game of the year. And, a battle of undefeated teams from the same state. Michigan, 7-0, ranked 6th, versus the number 8th ranked Michigan Spartans, who are 7-0. Peyton Thorne's having a great, great year for Michigan State. 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. What can we say about Kenneth? We already mentioned him earlier in the show. Kenneth Walker should go over 1,000 yards this week, only needs 3 yards. He has 9 touchdowns. And, of course, Jalen Reed, the receiver. But, also let's not forget Blake Corum, the running back, actually the dual running back for Michigan. Blake Corum had 119 yards versus Northwestern, and Hassan Haskins had 110 yards versus Northwestern last week. Both of them have 10 touchdowns on the season. Tell me what you look for. Do you look at this being a battle of running backs, or do you look at this game, what do you see? The game's in Michigan State, huge state rivalry, and this year it means a heck of a lot more with both teams being undefeated.
Yeah, so we dropped our preview on this one today. I mean, I do think it's going to come down to who can run the ball, who's going to be able to control the clock, win that time of possession battle, and establish their type of game because neither of these quarterbacks can carry an offense without the run game. You look at Michigan, they don't run a lot of play action, but what Cade McNamara thrives on is for you to load the box and him to hit you over the top to Dalen Baldwin or one of those big wide receivers. But Michigan State runs like 40, it's like somewhere right around 40% play action on Peyton Thorne's dropbacks. And on play action, he is extremely deadly. That's where he lives his play action, and he has got most of his touchdowns and explosive plays from play action. Kenneth Walker, Blake Corum, Hassan Haskins are going to be the key. For me in this game, though, both run games are elite. Michigan ranks top 5 in rushing yards per game right now in the country with over 250. So for me, it's going to come down to which defense will make a stop. And for me, Michigan's defense is much better than Michigan State's. Michigan State's is allowing over 400 yards per game. They play a bend but don't break type of approach. And this weekend, I don't think that's going to cut it. I trust, that Michigan defense to make a stop more than I do Michigan State. I love Aiden Hutchinson, the top graded pass rusher in the country. A lot of people think he could be the first D end off the board over Kayvon Thibodeau. As crazy as that sounds, I trust Michigan to make a stop. So I have them pulling out the win 30-21 over the Spartans this weekend.
All right. And let me say this, what used to be and was considered probably for both these schools the game of the year, an unbelievable game year after year, may turn out to be the ugliest game of the year between number 1 Georgia and the Florida Gators. And I'm going to tell you what, the Gators look terrible. And let me explain. I have never, Zach, in my life that I can remember, even in the Tim Tebow days when he was in Florida, how much they rely on their quarterback, whether it's through the air or on the ground. It seems like it's the only position they use on offense. And I know that sounds funny, but at the end of the day, whether it's Richardson or Emory Jones, I mean, listen to this. These two are quarterbacks. They're number 1 and 2 on this team in rushing. Okay? Yeah. Both quarterbacks are the top rushers on your team, which means there's nobody else this offense of Florida is based around. Georgia, we know what Bennett has done since he's taken over for JT Daniels, and we know what Brock Bowers can do, how potent they can be on offense. But this is a game, and I hate to say that I used to look forward to. They play it in Jacksonville where the Jaguars' home stadium is, but I see Georgia running away with this game.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Anthony Richardson being put into the fray could change things a little bit, but for me, I just don't trust Florida to be able to move the ball against this Georgia defense. I've been vocal. I think this defense is the best in the country. I expect Stetson Bennett and this rushing attack just to pound Florida over and over again. And I expect, I don't think it's going to be a high scoring game. Right now, I would say Georgia is probably going to win by 2-3 scores, but it's going to be that typical Georgia score. It's like 38-7 or 38-10, and they grind it out. They don't score a lot of points, and they're just a better team. I have Georgia convincingly this weekend over Florida in Jacksonville.
And I agree with you. Now, time for your boys. Auburn 5-2 versus Ole Miss 6-1. And I look at this game, and I've been a fan of Matt there's my tongue twister, but Carroll the entire season. Amazing what he's done. One of the top candidates for Heisman, I think. But Bo Nix, and I know you've had your concerns about him being an Auburn fan, has shown some composure in some big games this year. But
yeah,
in a game where we're talking about Bo Nix and we're talking about Matt Carroll, there's only one way, well, a couple ways, but the big factor in Auburn being an upset Mississippi is I think the tank needs to show up this week. Bigsby needs to have a breakout game on the ground if Auburn's going to have a chance to win. Because you and I both know, as much as we like Bo Nix, we saw him do some amazing things, but you know, you don't want to put the entire game on his shoulders. They're going to have to take some weight off him and not make this a one-dimensional game. And Bigsby is the guy that's going to have to help.
Yeah, he's gonna have to have a big game. And the funny part is this was kind of his breakout game last season for Bixby. He had a huge game in Oxford as Auburn pulled off like a big win over Ole Miss. And so for me, the key here is one, as much as home field advantage, can be taken into account, it could not. There's one thing you can say: Jordan Hare Stadium matters when you play in Auburn. You see it every year. Auburn beats Alabama at Jordan Hare. Auburn beats Georgia at Jordan Hare, so on and so forth. And Bo Nix plays better in Jordan Hare. That's the thing. Auburn is one of those quintessential teams where if you play them inside Jordan Hare, you're playing a different team. If this game was in Oxford, I don't know if it'd be particularly close, but Auburn hasn't had a big game in prime time in Jordan Hare all season long. It's going to be sold out. It's going to be loud. For me, I think Auburn is going to do enough to win this game, and it's only because, just kind of like Michigan, I trust Auburn's defense to make a stop more than I do Ole Miss's defense, especially in Jordan Hare. I see this being a very, very high-scoring game, and what I see happening is Auburn pulling off like a 7-point win in Jordan Hare this Saturday night. Only the second time I've ever picked them on your show, and the last time I did, they beat Arkansas pretty convincingly. And I'd have that same type of feeling that Auburn right now, the defense is clicking, and I trust Bo Nix and Jordan Hare to make enough plays to outduel Matt Corral.
The only thing they got, not the only thing, I use that term loosely, but the one thing you got to remember is this Mississippi team is averaging 263 yards per game on the ground. The key here is going to be stop that running game, make Corral one-dimensional where he has to do everything. And remember, Corral is two-dimensional. He can run. I think he has close to, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I know he has over 400 yards rushing. I think he got like 100 attempts this year rushing already. Yeah. So he's not afraid to run with the ball. If you can contain Matt Carroll and keep him in that pocket, he becomes a lot less dangerous than if you let him move around. So I think that's where Auburn has to really, really solidify that defense, is stop that running game. You know what Matt brings to the table, but if you stop the running game now, you can play better man-to-man defense or whatever and stay tight on these guys because you know they're not going to run the ball.
Yeah, and that's the number one thing is I saw some promising things from Auburn's D-line against Arkansas. Is that Arkansas running attack was legit, and they did a very nice job of slowing that down on the road and just making enough plays. I don't see either of these offenses scoring probably below 28 to 30 points this weekend. I think it's going to be in the 30s, 40s this weekend, and it's going to be a shootout in Jordan Hare on Saturday night.
Well, the next game is going to be defense versus offense. I mean, basically, Ohio State averaging 559 yards per game, 207 on the ground, 352 in the air. You and I know about C.J. Stroud, of course. Let's not forget Trevion Henderson as well, 11 rushing TDs. But, in order to even have a chance in this game, and I really think Ohio State blows out Penn State, it's going to have to be, you have to put a heck of a lot of pressure, be blitzing C.J. Stroud. If you plan on you got to make this a one-dimensional game too. And, Zach, I haven't thought all year that Penn State was as good as their ranking, and I think you may see them fall out of the top 25 this week.
Yeah, give me Ohio State by like 50. Joking, but I don't even think it's going to be close, man, because the number one thing you have to do against Ohio State is run the football. The one thing Penn State has not been able to do all season long is run the football. Ohio State's too good on the offensive side for them to be stopped. And this game's in Columbus and in prime time and at night, and there's a chance of rain. I got Trevion Henderson running wild on Penn State, just like Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter did when Auburn came to town. I think Ohio State wins this game by 14 to 20 points. I think it is an absolute just it's not even going to be close, to be completely honest with you. I think Ohio State wins it big.
Yeah, and I think we both agree on that. Now, one of the games that stuck out with me this week, and I talk about certain guys, Matt Carroll being one of my favorite quarterbacks in college football, but the other guy has to be Brennan Armstrong of Virginia, who I love to watch play. I mean, forget about it; it's just astronomical. If you look at statistics, 23 touchdown passes, 3,300 yards this year. But this is going to be, I think, one of those games where how does Brennan Armstrong do? And then let's not forget Tyler Algier from BYU, who's having also an unbelievable year. Last week he had 191 yards, 2 touchdowns versus WSU. I mean, this is a game when you look at it, BYU has been hanging around that 25th spot now. Virginia, they've surprised us some this year, and then they're not so surprising this year. But I think if I'm going to look at an upset this week, I know you said Auburn over Mississippi, but I would pick Virginia over BYU this week.
Yeah, I'm sticking with the Cougars here. Another added storyline to this also, I don't know how many people know this, Bronco Mendenhall makes his return to Provo. He was the big famous BYU head coach, and now he's over at UVA. This is his first return to Provo to face his old team. So the emotions are going to be running high on both sidelines. But for me, the key is going to be Algier at running back for BYU. Virginia's giving up almost 200 rushing yards a game. But Georgia Tech took advantage of that last week and just didn't have enough on the offensive side of the ball to capitalize. I think BYU is going to force Brennan into some mistakes on that trip to Utah. And then for me, I just think Algier has a just defining game this weekend. And I think BYU is able to pull it out over Virginia this weekend.
Well, one guy they're going to have to stop BYU is Tredavion Wicks, who is having an incredible season. That's why a lot of Armstrong's yardage is coming up. He has 847 yards already on the year. Had 6 receptions last week, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns with Georgia Tech. So, they're going to have to keep them from getting that big play if they do go on to win in this game.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to stop the passing attack. And all you really have to do is try to force Armstrong into mistakes. If you can get those few extra possessions, what I think BYU is going to try to do is just pound the rock with Algier in that rushing core, and then just try to keep the ball away from Virginia. They got a scrambling quarterback. They have a strong offensive line. They're just going to play keep away. And so what I think is going to happen is they're just going to try to pound that Virginia defense and do what Georgia Tech couldn't and make 1 or 2 stops that are going to be the difference in the game.
All right, let's ask this. Are there any other games that stick out this week? And, it's hard to put every single game up there, obviously. But let's talk FBS, maybe even FCS. Is there a game out there that you tell if people are available to watch it that you would say, watch this game?
Yes, I'll give you one on each. The FBS is North Carolina, Notre Dame. That's going to be such an interesting game. You look at Notre Dame. They had a very impressive performance against USC last week. Now, given USC's had a down year, but Notre Dame finally put that quarterback spot together. And then you got Sam Howell coming in, looking to rebound from a very, very tough season. This could be a great chance for UNC to get a big win. And Kyle Hamilton, All-American safety, is out for Notre Dame this weekend. That's another big thing to watch. So you could potentially have a huge upset alert on your hands when Notre Dame and UNC match up this weekend. And then for FCS, man, there's so many good games. I would say one would be Monmouth versus North Carolina A&T. It's a huge Big South matchup. Monmouth was one of the surprise playoff teams at the FCS level. And then you also have North Carolina A&T, this is their first season in the Big South after dominating the MEAC. So they get to finally move up and potentially put themselves in play for a playoff spot moving down the line. And then the other game, there's so many good FCS games, and you kind of got me like fanboying because I don't want to give y'all like a million games to watch at the FCS level. I I would say if you're going to watch any game, Alcorn versus Southern in the SWAC would be a great game to watch. It's a division rivalry. It has huge implications for the SWAC West race. Southern suffered a tough loss to Prairie View last weekend, which ultimately really put a damper on the season. But Alcorn finds themselves undefeated. They've won this division year in and year out, other than the spring when they didn't play. So Alcorn Southern would be another huge game to look for at the FCS level.
I'm pulling up the AP Top 25 poll, which I've looked at already. But when you look at the Top 25 poll, of course, the top 5 is Georgia, Cincinnati, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Ohio State. Don't know if I agree with Ohio State at number 5, but, when you see a team like Michigan, who's 7-0, and Michigan State 7-0, but at the end of the day, we know that's what happens. With this poll, anything surprising, anything that you don't agree with in this top 25?
I would say Oklahoma at 4. I mean, man, to be down 10-0 to Kansas at halftime, and if it wasn't for your starting quarterback stripping your running back just on a whim, you
What
would
a
have
beautiful
lost that
play
game.
that was.
Yeah. Oh, listen, I was talking to a subscriber on our channel. For a freshman quarterback in his third start to have the awareness to think to do that and then have the cojones to pull that off and do it, knowing that if it goes south, you arguably cost your team their undefeated season. Man, props to Caleb Williams. What a play call or what a decision by him. But man, I just don't think you can make an argument. So even right now, even though you don't love Ohio State, I don't think you would pick Oklahoma over Ohio State, Oklahoma over Michigan. I don't even think you would pick Oklahoma over Oregon right now in a one-on-one matchup, or Michigan State.
But you know what? They won 8 games. So once again, the system, and you and I have talked about this, sometimes you see those teams, because at the end of the day, Alabama should be number 3, I think. They have 1 loss. But I don't think there's anybody out there except maybe Georgia that can beat Alabama right now. So some people can argue that Alabama should be second and not Cincinnati.
Yeah, they could, but also at the same time, I would make the argument. I actually had an argument with somebody on in our podcast network about this, that it depends on what Alabama team you get. I don't think if you took that Alabama team that went to College Station and faced A&M, I don't think you can make an argument that they would beat many teams in the top 10 that night. I mean, Cincinnati would have beaten Texas A&M that night, in my opinion, based on what we've seen this season. So Cincinnati was better than Alabama that week. Yes, maybe Alabama looked more impressive this week because Cincinnati didn't look great. But as we both know, college football is such a week-by-week basis. Like, one team can look outstanding one week, and all it takes is one injury or one bad game to completely shift that perception. So right now, I don't mind the top 5. I would say Oklahoma. The reason I would have a problem with them, a one-score struggle win over Tulane, a one-score struggle win over Nebraska, a one-score struggle win over West Virginia, and a one-score struggle win over Kansas. The reason I have a problem with that is it's a pattern now. If you just have one struggle win, yeah, you might have had a bad week, but Oklahoma is consistently getting outplayed by teams that are not on their level. And so for me, that's an issue. And right now, I won't have a problem with Ohio State, behind them, but you can't tell me an undefeated Michigan hasn't looked more impressive than Oklahoma this season.
Oh, I agree. I agree
Yeah.
100%. I think Michigan State has looked more impressive.
Exactly. And I mean, really and truly, I mean, I guess maybe not this week, but Wake Forest has been more impressive than Oklahoma this season, in my opinion. And the other problem I have is the disrespect for a Pittsburgh at 17. They should be higher. When I'm looking at the rankings right now, A&M is getting propped up by that Alabama win. They have 2 atrocious losses on their resume.
Yep.
They should not be number 14 in the country. They have 2 losses, one of which was to Mississippi State and now unranked Arkansas. So you got 2 unranked losses. You should not be above a 1-loss Pittsburgh, a 1-loss Oklahoma State, a 1-loss Baylor. Like, what Texas A&M to me is completely overrated. And then the other one is what happened? Like, can we please give some respect to San Diego State?
And I was just going to mention that to you. They're right now at what 7-0 at number 21. But the problem with San Diego State, first of all, they play out west. We know that.
Yeah.
That goes without saying. But the level of competition they're playing versus some of these other teams just isn't there. Hey, give them credit. They're winning. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit about when UCF had that undefeated season.
Yep.
Yes, they won every game. They did what they had to do. They played the schedule, but at the end of the day, the strength of schedule, you got SMU also, who's at 7-0 right now, ranked at number 19. I don't see San Diego State, even if they win out, if a lot of these teams in front of them play just as well, I don't see you going to see them move above 15 the whole entire year.
No, like my biggest argument with UTSA, San Diego State is one, why are they behind Penn State, who just got beat by Illinois? And they got beat atrociously by Illinois. And then two, that Iowa loss is not looking great right now, especially after what happened to Iowa last week. So for me, they should be above Penn State. Iowa State maybe above UTSA, like that's whatever. It's just, I think they should be getting just a tad bit more respect, just a few spots. Let's give them something.
No, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, like I just think this a little bit low, just kind of like Pittsburgh. Pitt should be above A&M, and I think right now Pitt has an argument to be above Baylor, Oklahoma State. I mean, Pitt should be right there with Wake Forest, but with Pitt, you have that bad loss, and now you're looking at Pat Narduzzi's squad like, what would be your argument right now if y'all did collapse down the stretch to Western Michigan? That's the question of the year, and that's going to be a loss that I think is going to haunt them for the rest of the season.
Yeah. I'm just looking at some of these other ones. Yeah, Oregon 7 over Michigan State. Yeah, some of these, and I'll tell you what, I hope Notre Dame loses this week. I want to go on record to say that. Don't know if it will, but if they do, because they're going to fall down considerably as well. But it's just been a weird year. When you look at everything that's going on. Last week we talked about the Heisman. We mentioned Matt Carroll from Mississippi. Has anybody last week maybe had that unbelievable week where they could have pushed themselves in for consideration?
Right now, I would say it's a two-person race. It may be a three if you want to go by name brand. I think it's Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett. That's your 1 and 2. I don't think a running back's going to win it. And Kenneth Walker not rushing for 100 yards against Indiana, huge black mark on his resume. But John Robinson's team just keeps losing. He's probably not in it. And Desmond Ridder, unless Cincinnati goes on an insane run, probably isn't going to win it. And his performance this weekend wasn't great, so he's probably on the outside looking in. Bryce Young is a dark horse just because it's Alabama, unless it's Alabama's quarterback's always going to be in the Heisman race. But for me, Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral, if either of those teams can win out and they can keep putting up the numbers they are, they're going to be really tough to argue against in New York at the end of the year.
Yeah, and what can you say? Pickett just keeps. I mean, just keeps when winning. You say, okay, he's going to falter this week, he keeps showing people that he's the real deal. I mean, I can't remember, and I'm just thinking, what the last great quarterback they had was Dan Marino. It could have been Marino back in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah. So there wasn't an elite quarterback out of Pitt for a long time.
Yeah, that's just amazing when you think about it.
Yep.
Yeah, so all right, so we mentioned the Heisman. I think we got mostly everything in this game. Last question on the AP Top 25. Who has the chance to move the furthest up with a win this weekend?
I'm trying to think, man. I
Ohio
guess you
State's
would.
fifth. They're playing Penn State, so you're not
Yeah.
going to see much. You got Michigan and Michigan State. They're
And
so close.
the only thing so if Oklahoma doesn't look great, Michigan has a chance to jump into the top 5. But if you're looking for someone to move the most, I think it's Auburn. Honestly, if they beat Ole Miss and beat them
That's a good one.
convincingly,
Yeah.
then you're looking at Auburn. Their only 2 losses are to Penn State by a single score on the road early in the season and Georgia at home. Man, that's two pretty good losses because they judge losses based on where the team was ranked at the time. So Auburn has 2 top 10 losses on their resume, and then they'll have wins on the road against a ranked Arkansas team, have another top 10 win over Ole Miss, and then you're looking ahead to their schedule, and it's like, man, they still got Alabama. And the other thing people are forgetting, Bama lost to A&M. Guess who's tied for the SEC West lead if they win this weekend? It's Auburn.
I mean Auburn.
Auburn is the other 1-loss team. So that Iron Bowl becomes a potential SEC West determining thing. And if you're looking, let me pull up the AP poll real quick. I mean, when you're looking at what's ahead of Auburn in terms of the AP poll, I don't think there's too many teams that you would say, oh man, they wouldn't jump them if they got a top 10 win because they have that SEC resume on top of it. So you're looking ahead of them. Pittsburgh, Baylor, Oklahoma State, A&M, Wake Forest, Kentucky. You would have a few teams there that they could possibly jump. Plus, God forbid if Notre Dame loses, and then how far does Michigan or Michigan State drop? And then we keep seeing top 10 upsets. What happens if people in front of them lose? You can go from Auburn being a 2-loss team at 18 to potentially being fringe top 10 in just a snap of your fingers. And then on top of that, what happens if Michigan State beats Michigan convincingly? You can make an argument that if Oklahoma doesn't look great, Michigan State can go from 8 to inside the top 5. Or what if Penn State plays Ohio State close? Then you have an argument for possibly Michigan State having, I think right now, other than Georgia having 3 top 10 wins, they would have the best win of the year right now over Michigan. Yeah. So Michigan State and Auburn can jump huge this weekend with big wins, in my opinion.
Now I'm going to throw a devil's advocate at you while we wrap it up. We got 2 minutes left. If an amazing thing, and I mean amazing thing, happens this weekend, you saw how tough Florida played Alabama, this year. If they should beat just by some miracle, beat Georgia this week, will that knock Georgia out of the top 4?
Out of the top 4, probably. I think they would probably fall to about 5th because, let's just say Cincinnati gets through, Bama wins, Oklahoma wins, Ohio State wins, and let's say Michigan gets to win. You would arguably have to say that they might drop to 6. So yeah. I think they would fall to about 5 or 6, especially depending on how Michigan wins. Because if Georgia loses, how do you argue a Michigan team with a top 10 win this weekend on the road doesn't jump Georgia? It really depends on how much the committee values what Georgia's done thus far. But for me, Cincinnati should be 1 if that happens. Bama would be 2. I think personally, Ohio State will jump Oklahoma with a win. I think Michigan would jump Oklahoma for a win. So I think it would come down to who would they value over Oklahoma or Georgia this weekend.
All righty. Well, listen, my friend, another week in the books for us. We want to thank everybody. I know a lot of you are going to be watching this on the replay because I don't share it until after the show. So for all of you that are watching this show, whether you're on the tape or whether you watched it live, please share this with your friends. Any comments you have, we'll still take. We can always answer them next week. But on behalf of myself and Zach Mckinnell, to you all, have a great night and enjoy the football weekend. Good night.